Dawn over the western Pacific was calm, almost deceptively so. At 0942 hours, aboard a U.S. Navy carrier cutting through moderate seas, the Combat Information Center registered an anomaly. A single fast-moving contact skimming low on the radar's outer edge. It wasn't squawking identification codes, and it was closing fast. The group's mission was routine presence, a silent guarantee of airspace control. But in these waters, a breach could mean a crisis. The first warning came from the E-2D Hawkeye, its radar locking onto the intruder, a Chinese J-16 fighter jet, transponder dark, crossing into restricted airspace. Seconds later, the Aegis cruisers in the escort screen sharpened the track. Combat Air Patrol Hornets lit afterburners, banking hard to intercept. Shipboard defenses spun to life. Missile tubes primed, close-in guns tracking, electronic warfare suites ready to jam. Over encrypted comms, the carrier's captain demanded the fighter turn back. It didn't. At 40 miles, the Hornets had it in sight. The J-16 dropped lower, masking itself in sea clutter, a maneuver that could hide the telltale profile of missile preparation. Then, from the opposite bearing, a second radar track appeared, another J-16. Even closer, the airspace breach was no longer an isolated incident. It was a coordinated move. Within moments, the lead fighter cut directly across a Hornet's nose, a deliberate provocation at combat speed. The second J-16 slipped inside the defensive ring, and then the call that froze the carrier's bridge. Missile launch, bearing 090. But the missiles weren't aimed at the interceptors. They were streaking toward the fleet's eyes in the sky. The Hawkeye. What happened next would force the entire strike group into the most dangerous minutes of their deployment. A fight not just for survival, but to keep from going blind in hostile waters. The morning began with an uneasy calm across the Pacific horizon. On the carrier's Combat Information Center, radar screens showed the usual web of civilian and allied tracks. Then, without warning, a blip appeared at the edge of the air defense perimeter. A fast-moving contact skimming low, heading straight toward the carrier group. The timestamp on the log, 0942 hours. Weather was clear, sea state moderate, visibility stretching to the horizon, giving the lookouts no excuse to miss what was coming. The group's immediate mission was routine presence, but presence meant control of the airspace. A violation here by an armed foreign aircraft could ignite a full-scale crisis. And now, the unknown track was closing in, pushing the limits of the agreed intercept protocols. Somewhere beyond radar range, a pilot was making a choice that could change the tone of the day. The first call came from the E-2D Hawkeye circling high above. Unidentified aircraft bearing 085, range 92 miles, descending. Its ANAPY-9 radar had a lock, passing the track to the Aegis cruisers in the screen. Within seconds, the SPY-1D phased array radars were painting a sharper picture. A Chinese J-16 fighter, transponder silent, crossing into restricted airspace. The carrier's air boss ordered ready cap, Combat Air Patrol, elements to full afterburner. 2 FA-18E Super Hornets peeled off, climbing to intercept. In the Combat Information Center, operators cued defensive systems. SM-2 interceptors on standby, CIWS spun up for last-ditch defense, and electronic warfare suites warmed. Over encrypted comms, the carrier's CO demanded identification and a course reversal. The fighter kept coming. At 40 miles, the Hornets had visual contact. The J-16 held formation for a tense 30 seconds, then dipped lower, a maneuver that could mask missile launch preparation from certain radar angles. Warnings were repeated, louder, sharper. But then, on the tactical data link, a new icon flashed red. Another fast contact had lit up from the opposite sector, this time even closer. The airspace breach was no longer a single aircraft problem. It was a coordinated move, and the carrier group's perimeter was about to collapse from two directions at once. The J-16 broke formation with a sudden climb, cutting directly across the Hornet's nose at barely 100 feet separation, a dangerously close pass at combat speed. On the carrier's bridge, the move was read for what it was, a deliberate provocation designed to test reaction time and force a defensive scramble. Below deck, damage control teams shifted to standby positions, knowing that low-level aggression often preceded a missile run. The second contact, another J-16, had now crossed into the group's inner defensive ring, putting the destroyer's SPY-1D radars into continuous track mode. The operational objective had shifted from interception to containment, holding the fighters outside of weapons release range. But in this kind of close-quarters airspace violation, containment could collapse in seconds. The lead Hornet rolled inverted and pulled into a hard turn, trying to force the intruder away from the carrier's centerline. On the tactical net, the Aegis cruiser USS Shiloh declared weapons tight, armed but not yet cleared to fire, while feeding the fighters precision track data. The second J-16 made its move, a sudden nose-down dive to less than 200 feet above the water, using sea clutter to mask its radar signature. This triggered the shipboard SLQ-32 electronic warfare suite, which began jamming potential targeting radars. The carrier's close-in weapon system, CIWS, mount-aft rotated to track, its radar painting the inbound aircraft, ready to engage if a missile launch was detected. On the air-wing frequency, the Hornet flight lead's voice cut through. "He's locking me up." That meant one thing. The J-16's fire control radar was active, preparing for a weapons queue. But before the carrier's Combat Direction Center could authorize escalation, the first digital alert rang out. Missile launch. Bearing 090. The J-16's wing pylons flashed as a pair of PL-12 air-to-air missiles streaked away, not at the Hornets, but at something else entirely. Downrange, the group's E-2D Hawkeye lit up with defensive countermeasures, flares, and chaff bursting against the blue. The enemy's opening move wasn't about shooting down the interceptors. It was about blinding the carrier group, and without airborne radar, they'd be fighting blind in the minutes to come. The instant the Hawkeye's crew reported missile launch, the carrier group's defense protocol shifted into full engagement mode. The E-2D's radar feed began to flicker under the interference of incoming missiles and the sea of chaff, but its crew still had seconds to vector friendly fighters. Both Hornets broke hard, climbing to draw the J-16s away, while the Hawkeye dove toward the destroyer USS Milius for protective cover. The Milius's vertical launch system cells cracked open, expelling two SM-2 Block 3 missiles, each guided by the ship's Aegis combat system to intercept the PL-12's mid-flight. Simultaneously, the cruiser Shiloh deployed its own interceptors, creating overlapping kill zones in the sky. The SLQ-32 electronic warfare suite pushed a full-spectrum jamming burst, not only targeting the J-16's fire control radars, but also attempting to degrade their missile data links. On deck, the carrier's forward CIWS turret slewed into position, its radar beam slicing across the horizon for last resort intercept. From above, the Hawkeye ejected its final flare package, brilliant magnesium bursts that momentarily blinded the PL-12's infrared seekers. The destroyer's SPG-62 illuminators locked on, feeding the SM-2's precise terminal guidance data. In less than 15 seconds, two bright detonations shredded the missiles into harmless debris over the waves. The CIC's speakers echoed with the terse call, "Vampires splashed." The Hawkeye was safe, for now. But the countermeasure victory came at a price. While Aegis operators were locked on the PL-12 intercept, both J-16s used the distraction to reposition. One slipped inside the engagement envelope of the closest destroyer, skimming so low that the radar cross-section nearly disappeared in sea clutter. The second accelerated toward the group's starboard flank, outside optimal missile coverage. On the carrier's tactical display, new icons began to populate. Not just aircraft, but what looked like incoming sea-skimming missile tracks from over the horizon. The air battle was no longer confined to two fighters. Something larger had just entered the fight. The over-the-horizon radar tracks firmed up into conformation, a wave of low-flying anti-ship cruise missiles, their signatures matching the YJ-83, a Chinese weapon built to skim just above the sea at near supersonic speed. Estimated time to impact, under 3 minutes. The J-16 pair had not been the main strike, only the bait. On the carrier's bridge, the captain ordered general quarters, and the ship's klaxons bellowed through steel corridors. Every radar operator and fire control technician in the screen was now on a countdown measured in heartbeats. Environmental conditions added to the challenge. A light chop that threw radar clutter across the lower scan arcs, and a bright sun angle that could blind optical trackers to inbound threats. The destroyers USS Milius and USS Decatur turned hard to unmask their VLS cells, both launching volleys of SM-2 interceptors under the Aegis System's Rapid Engagement Doctrine. Each launch was paired with evolved Sea Sparrow missiles ESSMs for the closer ranges, creating a layered defense grid. The carrier's ANS PQ-9B surface search radar locked onto the sea skimmers, feeding continuous updates to every ship in the formation. Above, 2 remaining FA-18E Hornets from the cap streaked toward the missile vector, trying to thin the salvo before it hit the inner ring. The SLQ-32s across the group began emitting deception patterns, crafting false radar images to lure the YJ-83s off course. Over the comnet, the Air Wing's AWACS controllers began vectoring additional fighters, but their arrival would cut dangerously close to the projected impact window. One by one, intercepts lit the horizon with white blossoms, but for every missile destroyed, another seemed to break through. Debris splashed down within sight of the carrier's wake. Then, a deeper problem. The starboard flank, left partially exposed by the J-16's earlier maneuver, was now receiving a second inbound track cluster. Operators called them out. Smaller signatures, faster approach speeds. Likely a mixed salvo, possibly including the supersonic YJ-12. The defense net was already stretched thin, and somewhere beyond the reach of the radar horizon, the launch platforms, whatever they were, remained untouched, ready to fire again. The fight was no longer about surviving one attack. It was about enduring the storm that was still building. The decision came in seconds. The only way to break the assault was to hit the launch platforms before they could fire again. The carrier's air wings surged into action. On the flight deck, crews armed FA-18E Super Hornets with AGM-88 HARM missiles for radar suppression and AGM-84 Harpoon anti-ship missiles. Catapults roared as the first strike package launched, each jet loaded for a long-range maritime strike. The E-2D Hawkeye, now clear of immediate danger, climbed to re-establish its radar picture, feeding target coordinates to the strike lead. Intelligence from shipborne electronic surveillance indicated the launch signatures came from a PLAN, People's Liberation Army Navy, Type 05 2D destroyer, and a Type 05 4A frigate, both operating beyond the horizon but inside Harpoon range. As the inbound missile waves thinned under the layered defense, the Hornet strike group pushed low over the water, minimizing their radar cross-section. A pair of EA-18G Growlers accompanied them, pouring electronic noise into enemy search radars. In the Combat Information Center, Aegis operators coordinated with the strike package via secure data link, updating the positions of the Chinese ships as they maneuvered. The Hornets popped up for targeting, harms away first, their supersonic streaks hunting the enemy's fire control radars. Seconds later, Harpoons splashed free, their turbojets igniting for the final dash. The defending ships tried to respond with surface-to-air missiles, but jamming and the harm's impacts disrupted their targeting cycles. The first Harpoon slammed into the frigate's port side, a bright fireball punching through its midsection. A second impacted near the destroyer's stern, crippling its propulsion. Radar screens in the carrier's CIC showed the remaining inbound missile tracks fading as the enemy's launch capability collapsed. Cheers erupted briefly on the bridge, but were cut short. From the southeast, well outside the engagement zone, new radar contacts appeared. These weren't ship-launched. Their high speed and trajectory suggested they were land-based, possibly fired from the Chinese mainland or an island installation. The enemy still had reach. And the fight wasn't over. The new radar returns came in fast. High-velocity, high-altitude tracks descending toward the carrier group. Analysts identified them as DF-21D anti-ship ballistic missiles, weapons specifically designed to target carriers at long range. Impact estimates gave less than 8 minutes. Unlike sea skimmers, these missiles would plunge from the upper atmosphere, requiring a different layer of defense. On the carrier's bridge, the order was immediate. Activate Ballistic Intercept Grid. The Aegis cruisers shifted their SPY-1D radars into long-range precision mode, tracking the ballistic arcs. Sea state and wind remained steady, but the heat shimmer from the midday sun threatened to distort optical sensors during terminal guidance. The USS Shiloh and USS Lake Erie each launched a pair of SM-3 interceptors, their rocket boosters flaring as they climbed to meet the incoming DF-21Ds in the exo-atmospheric intercept zone. Below, ESSMs and SM-2s remain poised in case of leakers, any missile that might survive the upper-tier defense. The E-2D Hawkeye, already airborne from earlier, vectored additional fighters away from the predicted splash zones to avoid collision risks. At the same time, the carrier's electronic warfare suites began cycling deception patterns aimed at the missile's re-entry guidance systems, hoping to throw off their terminal targeting. In combat, the watchstanders monitored the SM-3's telemetry. Green lights confirmed 2 kills high above the ocean, their vapor trails fading in the stratosphere. But one track kept coming. The third DF-21D had broken through the engagement window, diving at Mach speed. The destroyer USS Milius took the shot, firing its last SM-3 in magazine. The intercept came seconds before impact, detonating the warhead in a flash visible across the fleet. With the ballistic threat neutralized, the group's attention turned outward. Satellite updates pinpointed the probable launch site, a hardened coastal battery on a disputed island. Within minutes, a new strike package was airborne. Hornets armed with precision-guided JDAMs and growlers for suppression. Hours later, the battery was gone, its radar silent, its pads cratered, the battle space finally quieted. But as the carrier's captain later noted, this fight had proven a chilling fact. The range of the enemy's reach was far greater than anyone had wanted to believe. In the aftermath, the carrier group's decks were littered with spent missile canisters, scorched CIWS barrels, and the lingering smell of jet fuel. The battle had lasted less than an hour. Yet, in that span, the U.S. Navy's most advanced layered defense had been tested against every tier of modern maritime threat, from close-range fighter harassment to over-the-horizon cruise salvos, and finally, the plunge of ballistic anti-ship missiles. It was a fight that nearly cracked the shield of an entire carrier strike group, proving that even the most sophisticated defenses can be saturated and stretched to their limits. Strategically, the engagement sent a stark message. In the age of long-range precision weapons, geography no longer offers comfort. A fleet could be targeted from hundreds, even thousands of miles away, without the enemy ever showing a visible hull on the horizon. The Chinese tactics revealed here, layered, coordinated, and exploiting distraction, mirrored the very doctrines U.S. planners have warned about for years. The victory, while undeniable, was won on seconds, precision, and the seamless integration of shipboard systems, air-wing aggression, and electronic warfare. Any breakdown in that chain would have meant disaster. The cost was more than fuel and munitions. It was the knowledge that such an engagement will not be the last. And next time, the scale could be greater, the stakes higher, the margin for error slimmer. As the carrier group steamed on, its crew knew they had seen the future of naval war. Fast, layered, unpredictable, and unrelenting. If you believe stories like this matter, and that we must understand modern war before it happens again, subscribe, like, and comment to support the channel.